How's it going, everybody? Going to be showing you a mono blue control deck. This deck uses Talrand, the Sky Summoner. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we're going to create a 2/2 with flying. This deck looks to play some really cheap spells to generate some tokens. We're also looking to counter opponent's spells and control the game. We're also going to be drawing a lot of cards. Cards that will help us get a lot of tokens on the battlefield can include Rise from the Tides. We get to create a tap 2/2 zombie token card for each instant or sorcery card in our graveyard. There will be a lot of instant or sorcery cards in our graveyard by the time this gets casted. The Fractal Theorist has Magecraft. Whenever we cast a spell, we get to create a 0/0 token, and we get to put X counters on it, where X is that spell's mana value. We can also make tokens unblockable. Metallurgic Summoning is similar. Whenever we cast a spell, we're going to create an X token, where X is that mana's value. We can also pay mana and exile this card and return all instant and sorcery cards from our graveyard to our hand, but we must control 6 or more artifacts. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, both Remembering Mystic and Docent of Perfection allow us to create a 1/1 token. When we control 3 or more wizards, we can flip Docent of Perfection. It still has the ability where it gives us tokens whenever we cast spells, and our wizards are now going to get +2/+1 and get flying. Starting off with some cheap draw cards, Obsessive Surge, Preordained, and Ops going to allow us to draw a card. Brainstorm, Peak, and Thought Scour also allow us to draw some cards. Twisted Image can help save one of our creatures and also draw us a card. Gitaxian Probe is a free spell, and we get to gain a lot of information about our opponent. And we can delve Treasure Cruise and pay 1 mana and draw 3 cards. Just as a reminder, every time we cast one of these spells, we will be generating a bunch of extra tokens. Clear of the Mind is going to help us interact with our opponent's graveyard. Think Twice is going to allow us to draw some cards and has Flashback. And if we have a bunch of tokens on the battlefield, we can cast Distant Melody. We can choose the creature type of that token and draw a lot of cards. Whenever we cast our first spell during our opponent's turn, the Hippocamp is going to allow us to draw a card. If Wind Reader Sphinx is on the battlefield, whenever a creature with flying attacks, we can draw a card. Most of the tokens we're going to be creating also will have flying. The Archmage has Magecraft, so whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we're going to draw a card. Both Factor Fiction and Pierce to the Depths isn't necessarily a draw, but it's going to allow us to get cards from the top of our library to our hand. Narset's going to prevent our opponents from drawing more than 1 card each turn, and we can also look at the top cards of a library to help get an instant or sorcery and put them into our hand. Chemister's Insight's nice since it has Jumpstart, so we can cast it from the graveyard. And we can tap Arcanist the Omnipotent, and it's going to allow us to draw 3 cards. We can also save it by returning it to our hand if we have 4 mana open. Moving on to some creatures. Delver Seekers can easily be flipped over, and it's going to be a 3/2 with flying. Tolarian Terror is going to cost 1 less to cast for each instant or sorcery in our graveyard. So essentially we're going to get a 1 mana 5/5 with Ward 2. The Djinn has flying, and his power and toughness are going to equal to the number of sorcery and instant cards in our graveyard, and it's going to give all of our instant and sorcery spells 1 less to cast. The Gao can't be blocked except by 3 more creatures, and if a spell or ability we control would counter a spell, we get to exile that spell and cast it for free. We do run a lot of counter spells in this deck, so we can take advantage of this effect. The Primal Tide can't be countered, makes it so our maximum hand size is infinite, and whenever our opponent casts a non-creature spell, we can draw a card. We can also discard 3 cards and get this card back into the battlefield. The Leviathan is 8/8 and has Island Walk. It's also going to make all lands on the battlefield islands in addition to their other types. Also, creatures without flying or Island Walk cannot attack. It is expensive on the converted mana cost, but if it does get out, it's a very big problem for our opponent. Wall of Frost is a nice stall card. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this one, but we have no maximum hand size, and if we have exactly 13 cards in our hand at the beginning of our upkeep, we're just going to win the game. We can also draw cards for 4 mana at instant speed, kind of just an alternative win condition. Archaeomancer is going to allow us to get some recursion for an instant or sorcery card in our graveyard. Moving on to some counter spells. Dissipate and Bane's Contingency are going to allow us to target any spell. This spell is more limiting with only instant speed, but it's only 1 mana. Mana Leak is pretty good for early in the game. Eskin Scatter targets creature spells, and Negate targets non-creature spells. 2 more counter spells are Neutralize and Dissolve. Counterspell is obviously another counterspell, and Rewind is nice since we get to counter something and tap our lands. If we have a follow-up play, this card is a pretty big tempo swing. Blue is a little bit limiting in removal, but Ravenform and Rapid Hybridization are good options. On Summon's a nice cheap spell that can either target one of our own creatures to save it, or one of our opponents to remove it back to the hand. Blink of an Eye and Boomerang are going to help move things back to our opponent's hand. Some more expensive spells include Invoke the Winds. We're going to be able to take control of target artifact or creature and untap it. Engulf the Shore and Aetherize are going to help deal with our opponent's boards if they get out of hand. Flood of Recollection is another way of recursion to get some card back from our graveyard. I like Telepathy because our opponents should play with their hands revealed. For only 1 mana, I feel like this is pretty powerful. Ominous Seas is nice since whenever we draw a card, we get to put a counter on it. And then we can remove 8 counters from this and we get to create an 8/8 Kraken token. We can also trigger this multiple times throughout the game. Defiler of Dreams is going to help us pay for some mana and sort of ramp into some spells we might need. Also, as long as it's not our turn, the Hidden Cloves is going to make our spells cost 1 generic less to cast. Jace's Sanctums can allow our instant sorcery spells cost 1 generic less to cast. Also, we're going to be scrying a lot. Arcane Melee makes it so instant sorcery spells cost 2 less to cast for everybody. It can be considered a downside, but the amount of spells we're running in our deck, this is definitely beneficial. These 3 artifacts are going to help us deal with some mana ramping. Moving on to the lands, Remote Isle and Lonely Sandbar are 2 cycle lands we're going to be running. And Mystic Sanctuary is going to allow us to get a sorcery instant back from the graveyard and get to put on our library. And when Halimar Depths enters the battlefield, we're going to look at the top 3 cards of the library and put them back in any order. And then we're running 30 islands. This deck performs very well when we have those creatures or enchantments that are on the battlefield, where when we cast instant or sorcery spells, we're going to be able to generate tokens. We're going to want to be casting these really cheap cards. Most of them just allow us to draw even more cards, getting us to either counter spells or more draw cards, but we're also generating tokens at the same time, putting a lot of pressure onto our opponent. I definitely forgot to mention some cards, so let me know down below what you would add to this deck. Thanks for watching everybody, take care, I'll see you later.